How's it going, YouTube? Happy Wednesday. Hopefully it's happy Wednesday for you, but for some of us, not a happy Wednesday at all, but such is life. Came across a couple of nuggets today that I wanted to, to put it this way, they got my political panties in a bit of a bunch, so I want to unwind them here and vomit my opinions into the digital space, because why not? I feel like it. Anyway, first thing is in relation to the Baltimore bridge crash. I spoke about it at great length in my last video, but I'm going to add a few notes here because I've seen multiple claims from different places that believe apparently quite strongly that the MV Dolly crashing into the Francis Scott Key Bridge was a cyber attack. And I really have to wonder how stupid some people are to believe that is probable. Not possible, but probable. Here's why. Firstly, because we no longer live in an age of reason, the possibility of some sort of terrorist action cannot be conclusively ruled out. That's just the world we live in. It's not impossible, so therefore it is possible. So it must be considered. And I'm sure Homeland Security, NTSB, and a wide variety of other acronymed organizations are looking very strongly into any potential possibility of that, in addition to the more usual suspects of mechanical failure, contaminated fuel, wiring shorts, you name it. But why I don't believe for a moment it was a cyber attack is as follows. Number one, for a ship of this size, if there was an ability that was built into it, into its control systems, where it could be remotely controlled, that would be a colossal security risk, not just to the United States, but to every other civilized, industrialized nation with a very strong maritime port architecture. Because at any given moment, anyone who had access to that ship could steer that vessel into anything. Not just a bridge in Baltimore, could steer it into, a compressed natural gas loading and unloading facility in, Bristol, England, for example. I don't even know if they do CNG unloading there or liquid natural gas. I don't even know, I have any idea. But if there was a reason to use a ship of that tonnage against anybody, such a functionality would be a colossal risk. So therefore, I don't believe it's possible, because if you shut down economies, you stop making money. And what do we all believe that the Illuminati or the great and powerful groups that allegedly control the world, Bilderberg and, BlackRock and whoever else, what do we all assume they're doing? Just hoarding wealth, gathering wealth, hoarding wealth, just doing whatever they can to ensure they are getting wealthier and wealthier. And you don't get wealthier and wealthier if you stop money from being made. That's my take. So that's a risk that I don't think anyone would allow. Number two, because it's stupid. If you can allow a ship of that tonnage to be remotely controlled anywhere in the world, you have built a terrible ship, and you should feel bad about yourself. Now, the counterpoint to that argument is that it certainly could be an act of terrorism, because it is possible, meaning the chances are not zero, that someone could have planted some sort of device somewhere on the ship that would have caused an interruption in the ship's power, especially at a critical juncture when the ship was maneuvering to exit the port. Because to my knowledge, when you're traveling under port, under bridges, any sort of body of water, whether it's a river or a lake or a bay, whatever, why the ship was seen to be turning after it lost power, I assume it's for these two reasons. Now, I haven't looked at all the data to see how or why the ship was moving, but this is my assessment, this is my assumption. Number one, the ship was maneuvering to align itself with the appropriate lane to exit the port of Baltimore, to leave that bay. Okay, and then while the rudder is angled, while it's turned to affect that maneuver, the ship lost power. Okay, very awkward timing, almost nefarious timing. That, again, it cannot be discounted. I don't think it's likely, but it's still possible that somehow, some way, there are nefarious shenanigans afoot with this whole scenario. We can't discount it. I'd like to, but I can't disprove it because I'm a trucker, not someone who has access to the information that the acronym folks have access to. So, you know, I have to accept the possibility. I just don't put much stock in it. So it's possible that, you know, the ship loses power while the rudder is turned mid-maneuver, which is why the ship pivoted as strongly as it did. Another factor to consider is that ship is a giant freaking wall of steel plating and containers. It's a huge sailplane. So even a slight breeze pushing against, you know, 500 feet in length and like 300, 200 feet tall of height, or 100 feet of height, or whatever the actual dimensions of the ship were. I don't know, 700 feet long by, you know, 200 feet tall with a full load of containers. That's a huge surface to be affected by even moderate wind. And even moderate wind can maneuver a ship of that size if there is no resistance to that movement, meaning powered engines, active thrusters, tugboats that are pulling on lines. So that's potentially why the ship was maneuvering like it did before collision, because it was being acted upon by whatever currents were in play in the water itself, as well as if there was enough of a wind. They call it a sailplane for a reason, and that's also why those ships have to be moving at a certain velocity in order to counteract the effect of wind and tide and current, because all three of those factors will work against a ship's intended direction. It's just the way it is. I mean, if you drive a truck like I do, or even a large SUV like a lot of folks do, when a breeze comes at you laterally, you're feeling the effect of a sailplane in a vehicle that can be affected by a gust of wind. Now, a light breeze isn't going to move this truck laterally. A stronger breeze or a gust absolutely will move this vehicle laterally. It will also cause me to lose velocity forward because it's got a huge effect coming at me. I've also been the beneficiary of a decent tailwind as well. Having less resistance behind me meant I got better fuel efficiency going forward. It happens. It's legitimate action that does occur when you're operating vehicles of enough of a height or a weight where wind can affect them. Even if you're in your regular car, you can be in a little tiny smart car or whatever, and a breeze can still blow you around. There's a strong possibility that there was wind acting against the ship. Now, I haven't looked at the weather reports to see what was happening, but again, you've got current, tide, and wind as things that are working against you depending on when you set sail. Also, you know, if it's a 700 foot long ship and it's 200 feet tall with its load of containers, it's a lot of tonnage. I speculated yesterday that it was 115,000 tons. I think it's likely that's probably well over 200,000 tons. That much mass does not stop quickly. It does not turn quickly, even with thrusters, especially if you're trying to recover power and get power stabilized. You know, it takes time. If that engine stopped spinning because there was no fuel going to the diesel generators, you got to get those up to speed. They need time to work against the water in order to move that ship. So when the ship lost power for the second time, it was basically lights out. If they had recovered properly and fully after the first outage, there's a strong chance that they would have been able to divert away from the bridge column not hit it at all. But when they lost power the second time, that sealed their fate. There was no going back to that at all. So, in my opinion, again, not discounting the possibility of terrorism or nefarious activity, but I do not believe it to be as likely as the probability of mechanical failure, fuel issues, or some sort of wiring or electrical failure that would have caused the power loss. My real world, shall we say, tie or connection to that kind of an issue is in the world of trucking. In my last truck, I was in Memphis during a pretty nasty thunderstorm in the fall of 2022, and I had about, I think it was about 30-something thousand pounds in my trailer at that time, and I lost power. Complete everything. Engine off, fuel pumps off, headlights out, dash gone, power steering gone, everything was gone, and I'm moving at 55 miles an hour on the highway running through Memphis. It was the scariest moment of my professional career to this point. Total power loss, and only because I had enough strength and enough forward momentum to turn the wheel was I able to avoid colliding with any traffic ahead of me or losing control of the truck, because with no power steering, it was like trying to turn a brick. That wheel did not want to move. So, fortunately, I was able to get it carefully onto the shoulder, and I was able to bleed off my momentum with the brakes very carefully, because they're air brakes, and I still had air in the chambers and my air tanks. Get the truck stopped, get the brakes set, and unpucker. You know, it was scary. Same kind of thing I think happened here. Some kind of electrical or system failure at the very worst possible time. And now as a result, a bridge is destroyed, 6 people are dead. And that ship is going to be, assuming they can even declare it seaworthy, it's going to be laid up not only for the investigation process, but like tear through the whole thing to figure out what went wrong and why. There's also going to need to be a significant rebuild period because the bow's been trashed. There may be some serious structural damage down low towards the keel. It's not impossible. That ship gets written off and scrapped because of the damage of having a bridge fall on it. Not to mention the lost cargo and all kinds of other costs associated with that. So at this point, while we cannot discount the possibility of terrorism or nefarious activity, it is way too soon to definitively say this is a cyber attack, this is that. No. Number one, again, like I was talking about earlier, because the odds of there being a way to backdoor remotely into a ship of that weight and influence its direction or influence its systems, very remote possibility. Now, those ships may be sending a lot of information. That's a one-way antenna, at least in theory. But then again, I'm a trucker, not an engineer, so make of that what you will. But I don't believe a cyber attack is the root cause here. I don't care what kind of conspiracy theories about Barack Obama's movie Leave the World Behind you want to tie into here. I think you're a fool for doing so, at least for now. I may end up eating my words, but right now I'm feeling pretty confident in my assessment. Second thing I want to talk about here, 14 minutes into my ranting, came across another little video on Instagram of a gentleman who was touting Argentina's prime minister for having balanced Argentina's budget, gotten them away from a huge national deficit, which I applaud him for doing. But this guy started foaming at the mouth about, this guy did it because he cut all the DEI crap, he stopped all the liberalism and all this other stuff, and Donald Trump could do the very same thing. I'm thinking to myself, no, he can't. That's not a prayer that Donald Trump has of coming in day one, assuming he wins the election, and just magically by March 21st, 2025, getting our budget balanced and everything lined up just right. There's no possible way. He does not have the authority, even with executive orders, to do that much. Because we're talking about a colossal effort to not just undo spending practices, but redo spending practices. And let's also be real here. The two fastest ways the U.S. has to reduce government spending and get on course to a balanced budget, not just one or the other, but get on course to with an and, not an or. The two things that the U.S. can do to get on course to a balanced budget and reduce the national deficit and the national debt. Number one, reduce defense spending by 75%. But that's not going to happen because there's too much investment in our military-industrial complex, and people are making a lot of money on the war in Ukraine, and there is still a tremendous global reliance on America's military to ensure that there is at least a level of peace on a global scale, which is why China hasn't annexed Taiwan. It's why Iran hasn't closed the Strait of Hormuz. It's why Israel is still on the map. It's why the Philippines are only kind of maybe going to go to war with China at some point over maritime rights in the South China Sea. It's also why Pakistan and India have decided not to engage nuclear arms with each other. It's also why, Germany did try to establish a Fourth Reich and maybe try to go for a redo of World War II, or why, for example, France decided not to, relive the glory days of Napoleon and conquer Europe, and pick your whatever reason. That's not going to happen. Defense spending is not going anywhere because it supports a lot of jobs, supports a lot of industry, there's a huge amount of investment in it, and way too many countries rely on American military firepower to make sure that they don't have to spend money to defend themselves. The reasons we don't have free health care is because we're subsidizing the planet's defense. It is what it is. When a crisis hits on a global scale, folks don't look to their national leaders for the solutions. They look for the American flag. It is what it is. Second way that we can get on course to better spending and reducing the debt is completely eliminate Social Security, welfare, and any form of entitlements or social assistance spending in any capacity. That would literally free up $3 or $4 trillion per year in money that could either be spent on other programs like infrastructure, debt reduction, deficit reduction, all kinds of other things, but it would leave your grandparents and mine completely unsupported. It would also mean that your parents and mine would have no parachute to rely upon from the government based on their income levels and their contributions to Social Security that they've spent into it or they got taxed into it, more accurately, during their working years. It also means that you and me have no retirement option unless we have a good 401k or pension that's going to last us all the way through to our very dying day. Whether we like it or not, so we need Social Security to make sure that our parents and grandparents have some kind of support. Yes, Social Security does need reform. Yes, it does need better support. Yes, it does need to be changed to reflect the reality of the modern American population. But the only way we're going to be able to do that is through concerted legislative action and compromise, because anything else is going to be defeated either in the courts or by congressional action or inaction, because no matter what Trump says he can do or wants to do, there are still limits on what he can do as the president because of the separation of powers, as we've all seen proven time and again during his first administration with the myriad court cases against his executive actions, as well as congressional refusal to pass certain laws that he wanted to get passed, and also during Biden's administration with blowback from the congressional delegations against certain legislative action, as well as court action against the executive action he took. Okay? The checks and balances on the different branches of the government do still work. They've been badly abused the last 8 years and more, but they still work. So the only way our budget gets fixed, the only way our spending gets fixed is going to be through legislative action, through Trump refusing to sign budgets that include a lot of pork spending, that include a lot of deficit spending, that include a lot of additional handout spending to people who just don't want to work. But the reality is that we still need to maintain the idea of Social Security to ensure that my grandmother and also my parents have the ability not just to live, but to live independent of whatever support they might need from me. Because millennials like me, not doing so hot. We're not doing poorly in some respects. We're not doing great in others. We don't have equity in a lot of respects. We don't have huge golden parachutes for ourselves. Retirement for a lot of us is looking to be a maybe as opposed to a certainty. It's an if, not a when. You know? I mean, in trucking right now, things are not great. And, you know, the outlook is bleak in the short term. Long term, it could be okay. Short term, it's not great at all. So, you know, there's a lot of things that need to be changed in the coming months and years in the article of entitlements and Social Security and things of that nature in order for my parents to be able to be retired independently, as well as for me to have an option to retire. Because there's no guarantee that any kind of 401k or pension fund that I put aside for myself over the course of the life of my business is going to be able to meet my needs for cost of living just by themselves. There will be a need for me, almost certainly, to rely upon some sort of Social Security when I'm in my 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s. You know, assuming we don't have the rapture and we all get Thanos snapped into the afterlife. You know? But that's for the future. For the short term, I don't believe that the MV Dolly colliding with the Francis Scott Key Bridge was terrorism, but I could be wrong. And I don't believe that I do believe that people who think that Trump can come in day one and, you know, just wipe the slate clean of DEI, wokeism, liberalism, and, you know, completely ridiculous spending engaged in by Republicans and Democrats. I think anyone who believes he can just wipe it all away day one is a fool. So, I'm feeling pretty good about that more than I am about the first thing, actually. So, I'll leave it there, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you down the road.